be facilitating this conversation today and also being joined by some amazing panelists. So a quick introduction to myself. My name is Sienna J. Brown. I am the VP of Growth at Power to Fly, as well as a leadership strategist and organizational consultant, where I really focus on creating a new wave of leadership that centers intention and inclusion in the workplace so that all folks have an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. I'm extremely excited to introduce the brilliant Zara Chartery, who is the People and Culture Senior Manager at Power to Fly. An experienced change maker, Zara prioritizes the disruption of harmful systems, creating and facilitating brave spaces and opportunities for individuals to explore their intersectional identities and empowering every individual to bring their whole self to work. And as we move forward, I would love to introduce Meredith Haberfield, the founder and CEO of Think Human. For the last 2 years, Meredith has coached CEOs, founders, and senior executives in fast growth organizations such as SoulCycle, Urbint, Splice, and large multinational organizations as well. And Meredith, I want to pass it over to you to just share a little bit more about Think Human. As we go to the next slide, you all will be able to see.
There we go. I was not allowing me to unmute myself. So sorry. I think someone just changed settings. So hello, so good to be with everybody. Think Human is a leadership development company. We work with organizations large and small on two main things. The senior leaders with coaching, both team coaching and individual executive coaching, and then cohort-based learning. And our focus really is on how do you have leaders bring out the best in themselves so they can bring out the best in others with a ripple outward. So that's us. And back to you, Sienna.
I love it. Thank you, Meredith. And as we move forward, I'll introduce our next and last but not least panelist, Sean McClay, Customer Success Manager at Bucketlist. Sean has over 15 years of experience in account management. He enjoys helping companies create a positive culture that engages and recognizes employees, ultimately leading to increased productivity and success. So, Sean, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about Bucketlist.
Love it. Yeah, definitely. I'm jealous of your ability to read and speak at the same time. So the bullet points of what we really do is we're a Vancouver, Canada-based company. We really love to help work with organizations and advise on best practices when it comes to recognition, rewards. What does that truly mean? We work with, small companies like an 8-person design company in Florida to a bunch of multinational organizations as well. So our team really just loves to be that advisor and consultant, giving you the best ideas of what is available. And also, if you do that QR code, kind of schedule a call with our team, we really want to help share kind of some more knowledge. So there's a 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace book that would be yours as well. So that's who we are and what we do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. And now we're going to stop sharing slides so we can see all of our amazing panelists front and center to dive into the conversation. So I want to kick this conversation off with a little bit of a question talking about everything that's happening right now, from federal government pushbacks on TEIB to social media warriors taking companies to task. I'd love to hear from all of you. How do you all really maintain a strong, values-driven culture when an organization might be going through significant change or external pressures? Meredith, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think if you're in an organization where the CEO and the executive team are very clear about where they stand, this whole thing becomes much clearer, because yes, you may modify the words that you use or a nuanced shift in focus, but maybe. But if the executive team is clear where they stand, it's like, okay, well, now we just have new design constraints to operate within. And that's certainly from Think Human's perspective. Like, we know who we are, we know what we care about, and the words that we're pushing externally may shift slightly because some things are so just like the the listening in the world is different, but what we are about is not changing at all. So that's one thing, clear, unwavering organizational commitment. And then the second is from an HR perspective, inward focus on embedding things in process and ritual. So, there's all sorts of things in the news about like, get rid of the DEI department, get rid of DEI programs. And to be compliant, some of those changes need to be made because the world is what it is right now. But there's a different lens to take of like, actually, DEI being a separate department may not be the best thing. Actually embedding DEI practices in everything in the workflow and employee life cycle is really great. So having it be embedded in performance and onboarding as a standard, and HR can really point their attention there. And then lastly, I know my answer is long here, but equity is a hot button issue right now. Like DEIB, equity, those words are hot, but fairness and is not. Fairness is like, okay, everybody can get behind fairness for whatever reason. This is not okay, and this is. So great, let's go with fairness, and let's make sure we are embedding fairness and no bias in our onboarding, in our performance reviews, in our perf process. So those are the things I have to say.
I'd love to kind of hop on what Meredith was saying there, because I think a lot of the pieces that you were saying is totally what I would say as well. And so I think it's really like looking at the processes, but also to your first point, I think it's really important to listen also to your employees, because I think it can be a lot of information that's coming at folks, right? Internally, you're trying to listen to your employees, but externally, you might be being mandated or being guided to do something. And so I think it's really finding that sweet spot between the two, right? So I think it's also being really mindful of what do your employees actually want? Because to Meredith's point, the reality is that focusing on retention efforts, right? Mitigating turnover, like these are things that are not going away. Might look different, might sound different, might require sort of new creative initiatives, but those things aren't going away, right? So really trying to look at those processes and making sure that, like Meredith mentioned, there's no bias, that things are actually inclusive and fair. These are things that can be done now. And if folks haven't been doing it, it's definitely something that should be prioritized. And really drilling down into what the values of a company and an organization are, right? I think there's been a lot of conversation from companies that are really informed by fear. So I think it's kind of shifting the narrative and really doubling down on, well, what are our values? Let's actually reconsider them and make sure that everyone is on board with what we're saying we're going to be doing here. So and just being mindful of all those different pieces. And we could talk about this one question, I'm sure, for a long time, but I'll stop there.
I love it. Oh, please, Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to this. We've started to see kind of just like the adaptability come out more of just kind of like thinking about how they can approach rewards and recognitions. It's always been more on the focus of fairness and making sure that everybody knows the culture, but I think that's a way that we can kind of help adapt a bit more. But yeah, no, love what everybody said here.
Excuse me, my allergies are getting the best of me this evening. I love this, and I think again, inclusivity and fairness is definitely a hot topic right now, as it has been for the last few years. I'd love to talk a little bit about what would you all say are some of the most effective ways, right, to really continue keeping employees engaged and motivated during times of societal upheaval or also organizational change. What are some of those tips and tricks that you all have?
I can kick us off here. So I think one of the things I often hear from employees that are really passionate about the companies that they work for is really trusting their leadership. And so I think one of the things that's really important is for leaders to not pretend like they have all the answers, right? And to actually be really comfortable with being vulnerable. And I recognize that not everyone is comfortable with that. It's definitely a skill set to build, but I do think that being able to be vulnerable and transparent and honest when there is a lot of upheaval happening, when there's a lot of confusion and chaos, I think is actually a really good way to build the trust of your employees as well. So I often tell managers, like, it's okay if you don't have all the answers, and it's also okay to actually say that and work towards getting those answers, right? So I think that belief and trust in company leadership actually goes a really long way in times of sort of chaos. And also just wanted to recognize that there is such a thing called toxic positivity, right? And so making sure that, like, as managers, as leaders, and as ICs, we're not leaning into this idea that basically toxic positivity is unrealistic optimism, especially in like times of challenge and need. It almost invalidates and discourages anything that might be outside of the realm of like positive experience. And so being real about what's happening, right, and recognizing people's frustrations or people's confusion around things actually goes a really long way in helping folks continue to feel engaged and motivated. Because if you don't know what's going on and your leadership also is just not being transparent and vulnerable and honest about things, it can be very difficult to kind of trust that they will move things forward in a way that will be helpful for folks. So I just wanted to kind of start the conversation off with that.
Don, you want to jump in next?
Yeah, definitely. I love it. I think as humans, we all don't really know what could be the next thing. And I think it is very powerful if you hear your manager or your leader or your CEO say, yeah, we're going to have, like, we'll adapt and we'll learn what works. Kind of, I think that shows that emotional kind of intelligence there that you can kind of rely on as a leader, either leading somebody or even just looking up to your manager as well. But also just making sure that things are transparent, kind of making sure that people know what's going to change or what might not change as well. Because definitely in the times of kind of like company reorgs or, a RIF or kind of an acquisition, there's always that question of like, okay, well, what's the company culture going to look like? What's going to stay? What's going to change? And I've even worked with companies like Meridian Clinical Research, where they got acquired by a company. That acquiring company actually loved the culture that they grew and adopted most of their practices into the new one. And that kind of like merged it into one good company where everybody was aligned and everybody was thinking the right ways. And it was really cool to see that it was almost like a reverse acquisition when it came to the culture side of things. So, yeah.
I had, in the spirit of everything y'all are saying, I had a boss in my mid to late 20s into my 30s. His name was David Graff. He was like a game changer for me. His motto was be real. And we went through many cycles of RIFs during the time that I was working there. And what you could count on from him is he was going to stand in front of everybody and tell you what was what. Like, no BS. He was just going to be real about what it is. And then after a reduction in force, he would pull everybody that was remaining back together and be like, does this suck? It does. Did everybody lose friends and people that they care about? Yes, that is true. Who's here in this room? Look around. Do we have to be leaner and roll up our sleeves and work harder? We actually do. But there's also something really exciting in front of us. So there was no like, I don't know, kind of like candy coating of like, here's, where you leave the meeting and you're just like, I don't know, I still feel like uncertain, just like getting it to the point of what y'all said is the be real. The other thing is, in my view, managers are the gift that keeps on giving. Like, they're just the ripple in the pond, they touch everybody. And in times of upheaval, we all know it can be super draining and exhausting for managers because they're trying to hold everybody. So I think when the people team gives managers a couple of key tools to work with, like, you don't have to check in on everybody all the time. Do a personal check-in once a week with the whole team and have everybody go around and say, to the extent that they want to share or don't want to share, how are they doing, so that it's built in as a process, not something you have to remember and carry as like a cognitive load. Or have a capacity planning meeting where during that meeting, everybody knows they're going through, what does the next week or two look like and where do things have to get adjusted? Or peer recognition, like you arm them with, here are a few simple things. You don't have to boil the ocean. We were joking earlier today about like, this is a time where you really got to get clear. We can't boil the ocean. There's too much change and too much to get done. So equipping managers with a couple simple tools so they can get that done and take care of their people.
I love what all of you are sharing, and I also just want to double tap in on what we're talking about. There's a lot of themes around vulnerability, transparency, authenticity, and I think for those of you who are listening now, definitely if you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat so that we can hear from them in real time. I want to talk a little bit about this because Meredith, you were just talking a little bit about recognition, peer reviews as well, and Sean, I would love to hear from you. What have you seen work best when it comes to recognition programs that really improve culture and engagement, and it doesn't just feel like performative feel-good gestures?
I had a feeling that question was coming, since that's what we do all day, every day. But yeah, I think what we've really learned is during the onboarding sessions of like bringing the company online, getting a recognition program set up, the HR team might have like a vision of what the recognition program should be. And we always can like consult and kind of advise of kind of best practices. But at the same time, we always get to like learn about the companies over the next 6 months or the year of what's working, what's happening. So it is always that kind of similar conversation is always listen to feedback. You're not going to be the expert of your company. You might be kind of seeing a segment of your organization that you might think is the whole representative of your company, but really just being adaptable. As previously mentioned, maybe you're a manager and you've got no time in the world and you feel like you can't recognize somebody. As an HR leader, as a program administrator, try to find those ways that they can kind of do the quick little thank yous in the comments. And that really goes a long way, where if your CEO is in your recognition platform and likes a comment of a peer of recognition that you received, you know that your CEO talked to, like, saw it, recognized it, didn't really put much time or effort. I wouldn't put much time or effort into it, but it was a really low lift for a CEO with a maximum impact as well. And then from kind of like an overall program status, we run surveys within our platform and we get those numbers where, peer recognition increases by 48% with programs that have like a recognition component in there. You get a 22% bump in leader recognition, but it really is just kind of bringing your company culture into a recognition platform as well. So I think I answered the question, but I also forgot the question. So I hope I got it.
You absolutely
Happens to all of us.
Yeah. Excuse me, you absolutely did. And I think something that you were just talking about is when we think about recognition, and I want to make sure that we're not just folks who are listening, it doesn't just feel like we're throwing around buzzwords or these things that we're not diving deep into. And so I think, Sean, what you were just talking about was so amazing because it was very tactical, right? What are specific ways that all of you who are watching today and in the recording can move forward and take this back to your organizations? And so, Zara, speaking of buzzwords, I want to throw it over to you because I think that inclusion and intersectional inclusion has definitely become more of a buzzword in the last years. And so what does that actually look like, and how can that be reflected in company policies, programs, and also day-to-day actions?
I love this question because, to your point, Sienna, I think sometimes we get lost in the sauce a little bit, and it's really driving down into those like actionable items. So I think you have to get really laser focused, right, on translating things into actions and goals, right? Setting timelines for things and setting accountability for them. So for example, right, I'm going to share a lot of examples of things that you can and should be looking at within your company, within your team. Taking a look at your L&D offerings, right? Like, what are the actual opportunities that people have around professional development? To Meredith's earlier point, really focusing on managers and making sure that managers are equipped to lead their teams as successfully as possible, making sure that they have the skill sets to do so, right? So what are we actually offering in terms of trainings, in terms of L&D opportunities? Is there a mentorship program that we can begin, right? So really honing in on that sort of L&D lens. The other piece is looking at your performance management cycle, right? I could think a lot of companies have like an annual review, and so folks are having tough conversations once a year. But the reality is once a year isn't enough, right? If you're really trying to focus on growing folks and make sure that people feel like they're included and belonging within a company. And so once a year conversation is not enough for that, right? So what does your cycle actually look like around performance management? Are you having another touch base at 6 months, right? Is this something that all managers are doing? Looking at your salary structure, right? Is there pay equity happening across the organization? This is another piece to really be focusing in on. Around the process piece, it's also looking at your hiring and interview processes, right? Like, are there places where biases might be creeping in? Is it streamlined? Are we making sure that all interviewing folks are trained up on what it means to be a strong and inclusive interviewer? Making sure that you have ERGs, or if you don't currently have ERGs, you're gauging interest in perhaps starting an ERG program, right? Making sure people have spaces and communities where they feel like they can connect with other folks around their experience. These are the types of things that people are looking for at companies so that they can really feel like they're included and that they're valued and that they belong. Another real piece that I often tell folks about, so companies will often have exit interviews when employees are leaving, but something that I personally love that I've seen be a real game changer is stay interviews, right? What would it take for employees to actually stay at a company? Where do they feel like their company can be supporting them even more? These are the types of things that should be streamlined across the organization, because you might have some managers that are doing this, but you might be missing out on a lot of valuable data because other folks are not doing this, right? So making sure that we are actually implementing state interviews and that that's baked into actual company policy, right? That's kind of the expectation when it comes to performance management, and really checking in on our folks. So there's a lot of different places here, but going back to one of my first points that I actually made in this conversation was really listening to your employees, right? So like, what are you doing to make sure that you're actually hearing what your employees want? And then that's the starting point to then inform the actions that you have to really build out, right? So it's gathering the data, whether it's by surveys or by conversations, stay interviews, whatever it may be, but then making sure you're translating that into actual process changes that are being implemented. And that is going to take time and real strategic initiative. So I just want to kind of put that out there. But I think it actually, the dividends that it pays are very, very large for employees to actually want to stay within their company. So I'm sorry, I know I threw out a lot of different sort of examples, but I really am like all about the tactical pieces. So I hope that that was helpful for folks.
Thank you so much, Zara, and I hope y'all are taking notes. If not, you can go back and watch the recording to take notes afterwards. I mean, we're talking a lot about also the role that managers and leaders play in regards to the employee experience. And so, Meredith, I know that you've coached leaders at some of the fastest growing organizations. What are some of the patterns that you see in the leaders that really maintain strong cultures during rapid growth or changing times, and just in general overall?
I think potentially I have two different answers. So I'm going to go for one first, and then you can tell me if you want me to say the second part too. But in times of rapid growth, and I know there's like a ton of wisdom, by the way, in this community, and y'all are very quiet in the chat. So if you have thoughts on this, like share your wisdom with us. Like we want to hear what you have to say. So please put it in the chat. What have you seen work when companies are growing or going through upheaval to maintain strong cultures? That said, I'll share my top three, but I want to learn from y'all. So the three big things that I have seen are, number one, know those few things that matter to your culture, codify it. So, Netflix did their culture deck. Other organizations have, their manifesto, but know who you are, have it codified, not a million things, but like those few things that matter. Documented. You got to have that. And it's not, if your starting point is, we got some stuff written down, but the executive leaders don't really care, all is lost. Like the next thing is the executive leaders have to live, breathe, and own it. If they're not, like it's not there. But if you got those two things, the next is a huge amount of attention to hiring as you're scaling. The founder of Airbnb interviewed every hire for the first 700 employees, because as you're scaling or going global, those initial people are everything about how the organization is going to grow from there. And then thirdly, organizations, a company called Premier Nutrition. I think they do an amazing job embedding culture training. You know, they don't call it culture training. They have a cool word for it that's about, you know, who they are, but it's built into their onboarding, and it's an annual training everybody participates in that's fun. So you're getting like indoctrinated. You know, I mean, it makes it sound sick when I say indoctrinated, but it's like getting into your molecules, how we do things here.
I love this. And in an earlier conversation, I know that we're talking about retain right now and retaining top employees, but this is also a core part of talent attraction as well, right? Because when you have the individuals in your organization that are oh my goodness, living and breathing the core values, and it's being embodied by everyone, that will eventually be able to help expand that culture. And so we're getting in a couple of really great questions and insights from folks in the chat. Alyssa is saying that at their organization, they have core values as a decorative piece on the wall. And the CEO recognizes how individuals live those values, which I think is so strong. Leslie is saying that they talk about culture in screening and interviews throughout the process and walking around breathing culture from the CEO. So it's amazing to see how this is happening and being let out in real life. I actually want to go to Ramona's question before we go back to some of the ones that we have prepared. Ramona asked a question, which is, how is culture defined? And I think that's such a great question because we often talk about company culture, which can seem so broad, but how would you all say that culture is defined? And Sean, we'll kick off with you and then we'll open up the floor for everyone.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's really kind of based on everything that we were saying. I love the idea of the stay interview because that kind of gives you a good temperature check of what your culture truly is. For me, I think the culture is something that, you know, the CEO or the co-founders can kind of start to think about and kind of like as a guiding star of what you would love to see your team as. But I think that also changes as you bring more people into your organization. You know, bring in more people into the hiring process so that you get a more diverse background and mindset of like who they are and how they're going to help kind of fit into the organization. I mean, from our platform perspective, you can put in the core values into the system so that you can truly relate any recognitions towards that. But I think from a culture perspective, I think it's, again, something that can kind of change. It could be kind of like the 3-year vision of what your organization is going to look like. But yeah, it's a very open question. And I'd love to hear what Sarah and Meredith think as well, because it's a great question.
Dar?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So kind of like what Sean was saying, it's like this, all these different moving pieces, right? It is kind of difficult to define at times, but I often think of company culture as almost like the personality of like an organization or a company, right? So that's informed by values, it's informed by kind of like these other pieces that we're talking about. And so it is kind of this amorphous thing, but I do think if you drill down into it, there's certain things you can pull out. So I think values is definitely part of it. I think how folks feel in terms of like leadership style, right? That's also a big part of it, especially how your managers and leaders are sort of pushing forth the work. I also think just kind of how I will say that there's different cultures that exist within a company, right? So there's kind of like the company culture, there's then like department cultures, then there's also team cultures. And a lot of all of that is actually defined by who's leading that sort of group, right? So I think leadership style actually plays a big role in shaping the culture of a certain sort of group. But I will say that values is usually kind of the easiest thing to pinpoint for larger company pieces. The other pieces are a little bit harder to kind of figure out, like, how do we feel about feedback, right? Like that'll give you a good sort of pulse check in terms of how people feel around difficult conversations, which also informs work culture and company culture. And kind of back to what I was saying earlier as well, this kind of piece around like toxic positivity. Are we a company that really centers that, right? Or are we okay with being real? Like these are all different sort of pieces. So I think that's an excellent question because it is actually kind of difficult to define. But I do think that in general, like especially new employees are really great to kind of ask, what do you think the company culture is? Because they bring that fresh perspective and they might be able to actually give you a really good idea of like how it's resonating with them. But Meredith, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
See, Tila put into the chat that she likes this comparison to it being like the personality of the organization. And I think to really jumping on what both of you all said, there are a couple favorite ways I like to think about culture. One is it's how people talk about the organization behind its back. So when you're talking to a friend or you're like, you know, telling your family or whatever, your loved ones, here's what the company is like. It's what's said behind closed doors about the company. The other one is it's the culture is the worst behavior that's tolerated. Whatever the worst behavior that's tolerated is, that's the culture. And I feel like I have one more. Oh, and then the last one is the culture is the behavior when no one is watching. Because when, like, you know, when eyes are on you, you're like, hmm? But when nobody is watching, what are the ways people get things done?
I'm loving this conversation and I'm loving these questions that are also coming through. So please keep them coming in the chat. It's been amazing. We're not done yet, but it's been amazing hearing all of these insights and just different perspectives. I think something that's also a lived reality for a lot of different organizations right now is that we spoke about this organizational change, reorgs, rifts. And so a lot of companies might be dealing with having leaner teams, right? And also still having engaged top talent there. And so I would love to hear perspectives from all of you really to be able to dive into a little bit about how can we ensure that people still feel seen, heard, and supported without feeling overburdened or overextended with their day-to-day work. And even thinking about it from a lens of ICs to middle managers to executives across the board. Who wants to kick us off? And I love how inclusive we're all being. We're all being very fair with sharing space. So I'll have whoever
I'll
kicks us
say
off.
I want the community to kick it off. I want to see like put your thoughts in there into the chat, and you know, we'll keep talking, but let's hear from you all.
Now the pressure's on you, Chad. Let's go.
Yes.
What do you get in there first? All right, I'll talk while y'all are getting your notes in, but I'll just go back to say the question again, Sienna, just to make sure I'm with it, is how do we keep people engaged during very leaner times and upheaval? Yes.
Almost, but less on engagement and more on feeling supported. So
Seen and
seen,
supported.
heard, supported.
Yes. All right, I'll speak on the manager lens because y'all know I'm all about the manager. I think the simple act of creating the psychological safety in team meetings, I know I said it before, but the simple act of creating psychological safety in team meetings to do two things: to share how you're doing and to talk about, to normalize talking about struggle. So whether that is a challenge, you know, a breakdown you're having in a project that you don't know how to manage or prioritize things, but creating the psychological safety. And, you know, I know that's a buzzword, probably everybody here is familiar with it, but for anybody who isn't, psychological safety being the safety to feeling that it is safe without repercussions to talk about vulnerability or mistakes. So managers focusing on creating that safety in the team meeting so that even in front of one another, people feel like they can both say, I'm struggling personally in the personal check-in, or that I'm struggling with something from a project perspective, instead of everybody trying to like be in this pretend mode of something else. And managers, we all know during times of challenge, they're so drained, like it's so exhausting to be a manager. So not forcing like, okay, to have every employee feel seen and supported, go one by one, but create the safety in the team so you are leveraging the collective and being a collective.
It's funny because as you're talking, I'm like envisioning some of my best managers, some of my worst managers, and how they would approach it. And yeah, not to call out one, but yeah, it was really kind of like that shift of having a very supportive manager for our group, and then also a toxic manager outside of Bucketlist, not within our company. That was a previous life, but yeah, like I think that's kind of that mentality that they brought in, is like they started to kind of like, as a toxic manager, kind of just like take charge, be seen as that leader, and kind of like the, not to say like do as I say, but pretty much have that kind of mentality to it. But I think there's the opportunity to really just open up the ability for managers to be the persons and people, show empathy, kind of start to allow people to kind of like talk about what's going through with the team, with the company, but also even helping empower some managers who are newer to like a manager opportunity, and give them the support tools and the mechanisms to train them up on how to start to give out recognitions or kind of shout people out for things that they're seeing, whereas previously they might be that top person on the team getting used to all those recognitions, and then as a manager they're stepping into that role and they're not getting those recognitions anymore and having a little bit of self-doubt that maybe they're having a little bit of imposter syndrome to that. So as these reorgs happen or things change, there could be those opportunities for some like the top leaders to move into a manager position and have that kind of like not shortcoming, but just the need to have those tools to know how they can help the teams out as well.
I love everything that folks are saying, both my fellow panelists, but also what's coming in through the chat. So thank you so much, folks, for being really engaged. And we know that you all have a wealth of knowledge too. So it's lovely to kind of see where folks are at and sharing their personal stories. So thank you for that. Just kind of highlighting exactly what both Meredith and Sean have said. I think really, again, focusing on actually making sure your managers have the skill sets that they need, right? So that means looking at your L&D offerings, looking at what trainings you're offering to your managers specifically, and really building them up to be successful managers. I also think this idea that Sean was talking about in terms of recognition, I think a lot of times when I say feedback, people automatically just assume it's critical feedback, right? But we should be giving positive feedback. We should be celebrating our folks. And I think a lot of times we're just not. We're stressed, we're overburdened, we're frustrated, we're kind of focused on getting the thing done, and we're not stopping to actually celebrate the wins, and even regardless of how big they might be. And so I think really making sure you're recognizing your folks, you're celebrating the wins, everything from the small wins to the larger wins. I also think, a big theme of what I've been sharing is listening to your folks, right? So like making sure you're actually, again, talking to what people want to do, right? I think a lot of times we're so focused on what needs to get done that we're not actually being intentional at all about who we're assigning things to. And I think if you do, I like to call it as almost like an inventory, like a skill set inventory across your team. It actually helps because if, for instance, I know someone on my team really enjoys research, right? If there's some aspect of a project that has a research component, I can actually tap that person in and say, hey, I know that you're passionate about this, you enjoy this. Would you mind sort of like partnering on this piece? Like these are the things that get people really excited, right? Like they feel valued, they feel seen. Like this is something, either a skill set I'm really good at or something I want to build, right? And I'm being given the opportunity to do so because my manager took the time to actually listen to the fact that this is something that I want to work on, right? Like these are the small things that really make managers good managers, right? I also think this is where stay interviews could be really helpful. It's not always helpful to have your manager do your stay interview. So I just want to kind of name that. But if data is being given back to managers around what could be better done on their team, that's definitely something that could be implemented by the manager across, the folks that they kind of supervise. So I think there's a few different things that can happen here, but really it comes down to, I think Sean was the one who said that word, like empathy. That is such a crucial part of being a manager.
I love this. And I also just want to thank you to everyone for sharing. And I also just want folks to check out the chat as well, because Meredith, I appreciate your prompt. Folks are really sharing more, and it's great to be able to hear all of the insight and conversation. So for those of you who are watching, if you have more questions, please drop them in the chat. This is sparking really great conversation. But it's interesting, Zara, you were talking before about toxic positivity, and Sean, I know that you were really focusing in on recognition. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you've seen, Sean, and how companies can use recognition and not toxic positivity, but positive reinforcement to really boost retention, especially in cases where, and Zara, you'd given a really good example of this. What does career development and growth look like? So what does that look like for organizations when budgets might be tight or raises aren't on the table?
Yeah, definitely. We bring in a lot of the IO psychology side of things when we're starting to talk to our customers, our companies that we work with. And really the one that kind of like is a really easy win, I would say, is kind of like the self-determination theory. So very much what Zara is saying is start to identify people's strengths and kind of reinforce like their interests and be like, oh, you love the data side, let's get you part of like a data team that's going to start to kind of like drill down into this topic. They're starting to kind of feel more kind of seen, but they also have maybe less imposter syndrome because they become that expert. And the more we see in that side of IO psychology is they're more willing to stay. They're happy with their work environment. They're being heard. They're being seen as a leader within their team, and really helps kind of even promote ways to like do career growths and other conversations that link to that. From a budget side of things, what we kind of find is for the first 6 months of a new recognition program, it's all about like points and budgets and rewards, which is a big component, but we start to see that like the thought process of a recognition becomes more about that recognition and less about the points. So, we'll tie that into hiding the amount of points that you get in a recognition, or focusing on people who are giving out those recognitions instead of receiving them. But there's a lot of ways that you can be very creative in terms of recognition without really spending any money in terms of that. But if you do have that budget, or if you're a manufacturing company that has like safety awards that you can kind of bring into the mix as well, you can get very creative. Even if it's having my co-CEO call my mom and brag about how awesome I am as like a nice little joke gift. I've threatened him with that because my mom will never let him off the phone, and he's too nice to actually hang up on my mom. But those are like some of those smaller ideas when it comes to budget as well. Yeah.
On the topic of retaining people at the moment that we're at in kind of like the political and economic environment, I think it's really important to know, also to name the stage that we're in, or maybe not to name it, but to know the stage we're in. That's what I'm trying to say, that when you're in a time of scaling, there are certain ways you're going to retain people that make sense. And when we're not in a time of scaling, when you're in a time of retraction and, trying to shore up the organization for its own health, being clear as a people team, and then having the team be clear, like the whole organization, what stage are we in? And Audra had put in the chat earlier, transparency and treating them like the adults that they are. And then April said in the chat, describe what's changing and why, seek reactions and feelings, and then give them a sense of control. Like, here's what's what for now, and here's what you can expect. Another way this was once described to me is that there are great peacetime teams and great wartime teams, and knowing which one you're in, and that during peacetime, there's like certain programs that you can launch and investments in things, and you're kind of focused on growth. Versus in wartime, it's like, let everybody know this is where it's at, and it's okay. Like, we got each other shoulder to shoulder. Things are going to change. We are going to need resilience, but that level of the what, the why, let everybody have their feelings, and then a sense of now we march forward together, and does everybody know what to do? To me, that's what has people stay during wartime.
I love this. Actually, Meredith, I want to piggyback off of what you're saying and ask you another question. I love the concept of peacetime, wartime. Maybe we're in the trench trying to figure it out, but I would love, no matter what time or stage an organization is at, what are some of your tips or tricks for how can we still ensure an organizational culture and our organizational best practices depending on what stage a company is at?
Best practices in wartime. I think a lot of them have been mentioned, but I'll just highlight. I think that in peacetime, we have a lot more opportunities for programmatic efforts. And in wartime, I think the things that we have are transparency and honesty. That, I mean, of course, always you want transparency and honesty, but in wartime, it's like people don't want the fake version of how things are going. They don't want, they don't want to be put into panic, but they want to know, where are we? And when you look out ahead, CEO, what do you see? And then what does that mean for us? And then how do I, as in my little world, sorry, I don't mean little world, but like in my whatever, you get what I'm saying, like inside of the things that I am responsible for, now that the company is responsible, what does that mean to me? So honesty, the opportunity to share and react. And these are all things, by the way, that I think it was April said. And then what does that really legit mean for me? Which then comes down to the manager, because the manager has to be able to figure that out and then create clarity and say, it may change, it probably will change, but for now in wartime, that's what it is. And those things, those programs that we have to give up on, I mean, not completely, but many of the things, the nice to haves, not being not pandering to the employees like we can't do this right now, we're so sorry. It's like, this is where we are and we care. Oh, this was a big one. We care about the health of the whole. If we're not caring about the health of the whole, nobody's got a job. So because we are caring about the health of the whole, and we're doing everything leaner, but that's good for you. That's good for everybody. Like, do we have to do things with less? Yes. But because we are doing that, we are actually solid and safe.
I love this. Thank you, Meredith. And I think, again, I want to give another chance for folks in the chat. If you have another question, now is the time as we're getting closer to wrapping up. And Zara, I want to dive into you a little bit. And so I know that you are someone who infuses humor in different ways in the work that you do, but also being able to infuse a sentiment of levity and transparency, if I'm being honest, to really intentionally strengthen culture and build resilience. So I'd love to hear some of your insights on what are ways that folks can do that without stepping over the line and also remaining professional, but while still creating that sentiment of psychological safety so that we can continue to build on.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to use my previous manager, who's Sienna here, as an example. So some of my best managers have been those who have been able to laugh at themselves, right? When things happen, when things get awkward, when things get tense, they don't have a problem like almost poking fun at themselves. And that not only does it go back to this idea of psychological safety, right? Because if you're making fun of yourself, then I can certainly make fun of myself, right? Like it kind of creates this culture where I feel a little bit more connected to my peers. But it also just allows us a pause, like a pause in all of the hustle, right? A pause in all of the seriousness. Because the reality is there's a lot of really serious things happening around us at all times. And so I think it can be really easy to just kind of get sucked into that. And it's hard sometimes to actually find moments of pause. And I've found that humor, right? And being able to kind of almost, even when it comes to celebrating things, right? Doing it in a way that's humorous. Because I will say, humor is very nuanced, right? And so there can be times where it will not land well. So you have to be really mindful of what you're joking about, who you're joking with, right? But I do think kind of making fun of yourself or like laughing at, something that you might have done is actually a really, kind of a safe bet. But I think also kind of to this recognition piece, doing it in a humorous way, right? Like Sean gave the great example of like, the CEO calling his mom and being like, oh, kind of singing his praises. Like these are things that are funny, but they're also just like great in building culture, right? Back to that team culture, that company culture piece. So I've found that kind of using humor as a way of celebrating, but also as a ways of kind of like laughing at mistakes that I might have made, right? It lightens the situation a little bit. It can diffuse a little bit of tension for yourself. I've also found that humor goes hand in hand with being playful. I think being playful, kind of injecting this joy into your day-to-day, like it makes a difference because again, things can get heavy very, very quickly. And I think when we're kind of intentionally finding the joy, finding the humor, being playful, incorporating fun check-in questions, right? Something that I love doing is in meetings that I have with folks, I usually have a random fun check-in question, like what's your favorite seat on an airplane and why, right? Like these are the type of things where you get to learn about people and it's also funny and it really builds and adds to the team culture. So I'm a huge proponent of this piece of just being playful because yes, we're professionals, we're doing really important work, but we're also humans, right? And it's great to be able to find these kind of moments of joy and moments of humor every now and then. And it allows people to connect with you a little bit more as well.
I just want to say there's a lot of research on having people like resilience research that says to build resilience, you need to be able to step out of the intensity of the experience, even though the intensity of the experience continues. So the pause you're talking about, like the humor is really meaningful, or bringing a moment of playfulness. For anybody who's ever been through grief, you probably know the experience of you're grieving, but you have a moment of really laughing so hard you almost cry, or you have a moment of being playful. And it doesn't change that you're still in something hard, but you're able to hold two things at once. And it creates more resilience in the person. Another thing that's a little counterintuitive in the resilience research is that people's personal lives become that much more important because you're giving 100% at work, but respecting that people need to disconnect and go have their personal life so that they're not like, when things are going well at work, it's actually easier to give 100% because you're like, all right, I'm getting the kudos and the rewards and the camaraderie and it all feels good. But when it's just a slog at work, people need to have multiple forms of their relationship to their identity of like, all right, I have a really rich and rewarding family life. I have a really rich and rewarding extracurricular life. And all of that sources my energy while I'm in this wartime.
Yeah, I also find it's a good way to kind of give some vulnerability as well. Like Becca, who wrangles me into all these webinars and stuff like that, she knows there's like the self-doubt that I'll have every time I join one. But then, yeah, like we'll make jokes, we'll like laugh about it, we'll open up. And I think it's a great way to kind of build that camaraderie. And Zara, I think you and I would get along because my icebreaker questions are always like, what's your favorite balloon animal? And I really find that it's kind of like breaks people out of the thought process of like a typical icebreaker question. And if you make them not repeat that answer, so you can't say dog for every single one, it gets people to think creatively as well. So, yeah, I think humor is in the right place in the right time, a really great motivator to help kind of open up and be more human and be together as well. Yeah.
I love this. And this is also coming back to the core concept that at the end of the day, we are all people working with people, right? And I think as we're talking about how are we slowing down enough to actually connect, thinking about innovative check-in questions, Meredith, as you were talking about as well, I think it's really just important to think about how are we also seeing the individuals that we work with, not just as what do you do and how quickly or impactful do you do it, but also who are you as a whole? Because that personal and professional life, they do tie into one another. And so creating spaces for more of that presence, for more of the purpose, and to really lean in with people first leadership really makes all of the difference. And with this, I know our time is coming to an end. I'm sad because I'm just absorbing so much great conversation, and I'm sure that all of the folks who are watching as well. I want to end us with one question before I want to go to the audience and hear what is one big takeaway that you all are getting from this conversation. But Meredith, Sean, and Zara, I would love for you all to share what is one key investment that every company should make today to really be able to create a culture that can withstand tomorrow or next year, next decade's challenges? What's one key investment to invest in the future of a culture?
I mean, I'll break the ice and say a Bucketlist rewards platform that allows you to create a culture and recognition system. But I think outside of that cheeky answer, I think really listening to your team doesn't cost any money, opens up those communications and gives you a good idea of what could be the next things. So if you're in that peacetime transition, perfect time to kind of like make sure you're ready for that world wartime mode and think about those type of things. And with that, it's always the feedback that you receive from your team, the open conversations you have with your leader, your CEO, kind of rebroadcasting the company culture as well. That's the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that question.
I'll jump in. Managers, the ripple in the pond, they touch everybody. Supporting managers, not just to do the love part, because we already talked about the love, so I'm going to say something different, but to do the clarity part, and the clarity part being two things. Number one, that people are super clear, like this is what you are responsible for, and not like you everything under the sun, but like this is what success looks like, and then being respectful of evenings and weekends so people can pull out and really disconnect, knowing that is there an occasional time they might have to work on an evening or a weekend? Yeah, actually, in many organizations, there are those occasional times, but having people be able to be super clear that that is not the norm. So you know what you're responsible for, and then you can really disconnect and have autonomy inside your life. We all know control and autonomy are so important. So investing in control and autonomy by managers setting that up for the team.
Yeah, I'll round out this question with just the reminder that we need to figure out where are the places that we need to audit our processes, right? So really looking at a performance management cycle, looking at your hiring and interview processes, looking at what are the sort of retention tactics that we're using at our company, almost doing a little bit of like an audit of what are the ways we're gathering data from our folks, and how are we making sure that things are as inclusive and fair as they possibly can be. So it's really sitting down, looking at all of these sort of things and figuring out, okay, we haven't looked at this. We need to like kind of dive deeper there, and really like honing in on that action side. I know Sienna's looking for the mic, but also in the meantime, I want to say, focus on what you already have and how do we make it stronger, right? Because I think for a lot of companies that are in that sort of wartime right now, starting brand new things might not be an option, right? So how are we making sure that things that already exist are very, very strong?
Yeah, I think also kind of just like building that team where you can say no, like if you're not comfortable with doing something or you don't know how to do something, you can always kind of create a culture where like you expect everybody to know things. But if you start to kind of encourage that within your team that says, oh no, I'm not comfortable or I need more help with that, I think that can reduce a lot of stressors for a lot of people that might not be open to saying no to certain leaders and teams as well.
I love this. And Meredith, I see you popping things in the chat. Is there anything that you want to share before we round out?
No, I just feel like this community has so many great insights. The three of us, Zara, Sean, and I are sharing ours, but love hearing from everybody.
Gotta say, Meredith, yeah, your
Amazing.
skills of
Well,
working the chat and this conversation at once is very impressive.
I love it. I was like, Sean, I feel like I'm learning that you value being able to multitask. I was like, and I appreciate that about you. The recognition shares more about individuals. I love it. No, I just want to say thank you so much to Meredith, Sean, and Zara, and also for our partners. We will all be following up with you all for you to continue connecting, hearing insights. Thank you to all of you who have been attending, who have been engaging in the chat, who have really been contributing just as much as our panelists. I want to say again, here is the SHRM and the HRCI codes if you would like to use this. And as we're rounding out this amazing summit, again, I just want to say thank you to all of our partners. Please feel free to stay connected with Power to Fly as well. And I hope you all are able to take one thing from the conversations that you listened and tuned into today. Drop in the chat what's one thing you learned or that you are taking from today's conversation. We would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, feel free to connect on LinkedIn and continue connecting out after these conversations end. So thank you all for attending the Reach, Recruit, and Retain conference, our summit, and we cannot wait to see you in the future. You will be able to watch the recording so you can go back and take notes and hear all of the amazing insights. But in the meantime, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your Wednesday. And Zara, Mary, and Sean, thank you all so much for your participation in this conversation. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.